Greetings, everyone. Keith here. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. Want to get on and talk today about a case, and I cannot remember the name of the case, but I think it's important to discuss it. And as soon as I can find it in my files, I will post it with this video. But we have to realize today, in these modern times, people are infringing upon each other in a lot of different ways, and they don't recognize it at first because they don't take everything into consideration in their actions. And this case that I'm talking about is specific to a retirement home that, when they felt that they needed to expand because they had full residency and there were plenty of customers out there, they decided to build a new building and move their residents. And that was fine and dandy. They did all the planning and the contracting and everything, and they got the building built, and they moved their residents in, and were of course had other residents applying and ready to fill up some rooms. But the problem was that when they moved the residents from the old place into the new place, the place where the residents were at was fine as it was. And then when they moved, the place that the company, the entity, decided to build the new building was right next to a cattle feedlot on the outskirts of town. And when the residents started complaining, the entity itself has an obligation. And what they did was they changed an environment that the residents had become habitated to. And they changed the habitat by relocation. Now, this relocation is done through HUD construction contracts for insurance purposes that cover environmental conservation concerns, health concerns, agricultural concerns, all of those different things to make sure that what we're doing to the land isn't destroying the land. And so they have to do a certain commit to a certain degree of condemnation of the land in order to use the land for their commercial purposes. And this is the aspect of this old folks home, the retirement home, moving next to this feedlot. All of a sudden there was a recognition that something was not necessarily destroying the land, but it was causing a perceptible harm and damage to the retirement people. And it was causing complaints, and people, old folks have a hard time breathing to begin with. And now they're sitting next to a pile of shit, So yeah, they're going to complain. And if people would have thought about that firsthand, they would have been able to avoid something. And that avoidance would have been the fact that when it went to court and the residents had their complaint about the cattle lot, the people that built the retirement home pushed the claim that the cattle lot needed to move. Even though the retirement entity is the one that encroached, they call it encroached, into that area where the feedlot was already existent. The contracting through HUD didn't take in that part. And so under the insurance, though it was deemed that the entity encroached, and therefore they're the ones that are responsible, it wasn't equity to make them tear down the building, move the residents back to the old building, because the old building's already done taken care of. It's no longer. That's why they moved. They needed to expand. It's being used for something else. And they can't go back and make them people move. So it's a forward progression rather than a digression back to a previous state, forcing somebody else harm and detriment as well. So what happened is that instead of forcing the retirement home to move back after they have been acknowledged to encroached, the decision was to make the cattle feedlot move. But the responsibility remained with the encroaching entity, and that responsibility with the encroaching entity also has a co-responsibility through HUD, through the original construction contract of the retirement entity, as well as the feedlot. See, HUD has its hands in every construction contract for environmental protection and conservation laws. So effectively what happened was that the entity, the retirement home, had to pay for the costs of moving and everything, but it was insured through HUD, through the relocation program, and it promoted the reclamation of the land that the feedlot used to own back to its natural use. So I urge people to think about everything when it comes down to the end result. Everything is for environmental protection and conservation, regardless of any of their commercial transactions. They may enforce the commercial transactions, but there's always a creation of remedy if you are thinking about the natural environment. Because in that natural environment, even in their agricultural code, under 7 U.S.C. 136, they define man as an animal. And that environmental protection and conservation laws protects utmost, first and foremost, all living creatures known as wildlife and animals, plants and materials that are naturally existing in their first original form and element. We are the image and likeness of the greatest creator, and they're trying to say they have regulation over us, when that is total fallacy. Complete and total fallacy. The only thing in those contracts that they can force is the person, and that is a name and number, and that identifies the record. And let me point out that the Paperwork Reduction Act is a great effort. However, the problem is, even in their seeking to protect the environment and conservation laws, to cut down the use of paper, to cut down the cutting down of trees to make the paper. It's just like the legislation in California to get rid of plastic straws. And they ended up getting rid of plastic straws wrapped in paper wraps, and now they use paper straws wrapped in plastic wraps. Pretty fucking ignorant. So what we see in the Paperwork Reduction Act, I want to point out very clearly, if 98% of the income tax is paid voluntarily, that means 98% of the people are paying taxes voluntarily. And if the tax system, the identification index system, is dependent upon that paperwork, and 98% of it is being entered voluntarily, then 98% of that Paperwork Reduction Act responsibility lies on you. Just quit entering the fucking the voluntary shit. You're not required to enter. You are in this world already, but you are not of this world. And there is no passport that can change that. None. Period. Jeremiah 1 verse 5. Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. Before thou wast cast from the womb, I sanctified thee. I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. None of the nations' ordinances can sanction the word of God. Carrying the word of God itself is equity, and it is your remedy. We are to preach the gospel unto all creatures. So in every endeavor, make sure that the final intent is so that all creatures remain whole. And none are harmed and damaged. None. If the commercial contract is causing harm and damage, that's a condemnation. That's strictly going against the word of God. So please pay attention to everything and realize everything's what is done is what ought be done. What ought be done. And what ought be done is that we preach the gospel to every creature. And if they can't recognize in their own codes, no matter what code they're using, it relates originally to the original construction contract, ensuring the protection of the environment and conservation of that environmental material, known as plants and animals. Further defined as agriculture and fields and areas and husbandry and all of that other shit. That's all personage. God created man of the dust of the ground, and he breathed the breath of life into his nostrils, and man became a living soul. Everything that breathes is a living soul, and every plant that gives us that oxygen is where we get our source of oxygen to be living souls, and therefore they too are the source. They are what breathes the breath of life into our nostrils. We are to give back to them, and we do so naturally through the carbon dioxide. I urge every one of you to realize that every breath is an act of God, and it is a first and foremost agreement with plant life, who carries up the nutrients from the mineral ground that we can then sustain ourselves, not just through the oxygen, but by eating those plants, the nuts and seeds. These ye shall call meat. And with that, I'm done with my little sermon today, guys. Remember that. That's the only way you can bring equity. All these people want to talk about equity. It has nothing to do with contracts or nothing. You want to talk about equity, you bring it with the fucking word of God, and you preach it to every creature, and you do it at all times as loud as you can. And remember, I ain't doing this for myself. If it weren't for you guys, I would not be doing this. I love y'all. Have a great day. Bye.